affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Very good evening to you. It's 8 o'clock on Brazier tonight. Should Britain be bracing for a campaign of terror in the run-up to Christmas? And if so, should you be thinking of changing your plans? Also, how does mainstream media cover terror attacks? Do they see themselves as an agency of reassurance or truth-tellers, come what may? And did astronauts take to their space station lifeboats today after Russia blew up a satellite in orbit? All that's coming up. But first, a news update with Polly.
Thank you, Colin. Good evening. Police have named the bombing suspect who died in Sunday's Liverpool taxi explosion as 32-year-old Ahmad Al-Swaim. He donated an improvised device outside a Liverpool women's hospital, killing himself. The driver, David Perry, escaped with minor injuries. He's being praised for his actions after saying he'd locked the car doors moments before the explosion. 4 people have been arrested under anti-terrorism legislation, and a controlled explosion was carried out in Sefton Park today as a precaution and as part of the ongoing investigation into the case. Meanwhile, the terrorism threat level in the UK has been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely.
It's a stark reminder of the need for us all to remain utterly vigilant. What yesterday showed, above all, is that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism. We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence. And our freedoms and our way of life will always prevail.
Well, a cordon today was placed around 2 addresses which police say Al-Swaim was connected to. Police are saying significant items were found at one of the addresses. A second property is also being searched. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is in Liverpool.
Our understanding is that that address in Rutland Avenue is the bomb factory, we understand, where this device was assembled before this man ordered a taxi and asked the driver to take him to the women's hospital just about a mile from that address.
Well, away from Liverpool, 3 Baltic states say Belarus must be held accountable for human trafficking. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia have all condemned the actions of the Lukashenko regime, which has left up to 4,000 migrants camped out and stranded on the border with Poland. The European Union's foreign ministers have now agreed a 5th round of sanctions against Belarus, which will be finalised in the next few days. In the States, the former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has appeared before a judge to face criminal contempt charges. That's after he defied a congressional subpoena from the committee investigating the US Capitol riots. The Justice Department says one count was for refusing to appear for a deposition, the other for refusing to provide documents. If convicted, Bannon faces up to 2 years in jail. The West Yorkshire Mayor has criticised a reported plan to scrap the eastern leg of HS2. Tracy Brabin says a railway fit for the 21st century is needed. That follows the reports the government could abandon a new line connecting Leeds, Bradford and Manchester. An integrated rail plan is being published on Thursday. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour. Now back to Colin.
Well, whichever way you look at it, if one young man had got his way yesterday, we would most probably today be mourning dozens of deaths. Police say the taxi which blew up outside a hospital in Liverpool was an act of terror, but it almost certainly wasn't the spectacular the bomber intended. Ahmed Al-Swelmeen, as we now know his name to be, died, but perhaps only because a detonator did enough damage to kill him without setting off explosives that could have killed many more. If the 32-year-old's target was Liverpool Women's Hospital, a car bomb there would have caused untold damage, blast injuries to sick women and their children. The thought of all those hospital windows being blown through hardly bears thinking about. But if the target was the Anglican Cathedral, just a short walk away where a Remembrance Sunday service was about to start, then casualties may also have run into the hundreds. Either way, we were lucky, and tonight security services are trying to work out whether this is the beginning of a terror campaign in the run-up to Christmas or the act of a lone individual. In a moment, we'll be talking about the way mainstream media cover terror outrages, and I'll ask a migration expert about the security risk posed by the record number of mainly Middle Eastern men who've crossed the Channel this year. But first, from Liverpool, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, now reports.
It's just before 11 a.m. on Remembrance Sunday. As the nation pauses to remember its war dead, this security camera captures the moment a taxi pulls up at the front of Liverpool Women's Hospital. Moments later, an explosion. As smoke pours from the taxi, the driver, David Perry, can be seen staggering from the vehicle, thankfully with only minor injuries. In the back of the cab, as it's engulfed in flames, a man who police now believe was a bomber, who brought his explosive device into the taxi. It's not clear what any intended target was, but police say he asked the driver to take him to the women's hospital. A memorial service was also taking place nearby. The explosion has now been formally declared a terrorist incident.
Following discussions with Army Ordnance Disposal, we are able to confirm that this is being treated as the ignition of an explosive device. Our inquiries also indicate that the device was brought into the cab by the passenger.
The taxi driver, who's now been released from hospital and is recovering at home, has been hailed a hero. Away from the scene of the explosion, police raided 2 residential addresses and made 4 arrests. Those arrested under the Terrorism Act are still in police custody today, being questioned by counter-terrorism detectives who are trying to piece together information about the suspect and his movements prior to the explosion. At Rutland Avenue, around a mile from the hospital, there is still a heavy police presence. A mobile police command unit has been set up at the end of the street as a property linked to the dead suspect is searched. Neighbours told us of their shock at the unfolding events.
You don't really see stuff around here like that. I think it's a bit mad wherever you live. You see things like this, isn't it? We don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, it's a bit clueless.
Even the police just said they don't really know what's going on.
Well, the other police at that side said there was a manhunt.
Police and security services are now urgently trying to establish whether there is any wider threat to the public. They've said they've discovered significant items at the Rutland Avenue address and are likely to be involved in a prolonged search of that property. Mark White, GBNews, Liverpool.
Well, earlier the Prime Minister thanked the emergency services while warning of the potential for further attacks.
The police have now confirmed that this is being treated as a terrorist attack, and while the investigation continues at pace, you will understand that I can't comment on the details of the case or its motivation, but it is a stark reminder of the need for us all to remain utterly vigilant, and the Independent Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, JTAC, are today raising the UK's threat level from substantial to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely.
Well, let's turn to Mark White, who's in Liverpool for us tonight. Mark, a very good evening to you. Whatever it turns out the motivation behind this attack was, Mark, we can agree, can't we, that this could have been so much worse had there been a bigger explosion, if this hadn't just been perhaps the detonator going off rather than the IED itself?
Yeah, I mean, it looked a fairly powerful blast, even just from a partial detonation, Colin. But you're right, had this individual been able to get out of the back of that cab and into the hospital proper, had it fully detonated, then we would have been looking at many casualties here. And as police continue to piece together exactly what the makeup of that device is, what they'll want to know, of course, is whether any other individuals may have helped this bomber in purchasing the ingredients, in assembling the device, and, of course, crucially, Colin, whether there might be any more of these devices still out there.
Yeah. I just wonder, Mark, and I dare say some of our viewers might want to know as well, to what extent, at times like this, I mean, you've been covering goodness knows how many of these terror outrages, sad to say, over the years. To what extent you are told, and people doing the same sort of job in journalism that you do, are told off the record perhaps what's going on, or whether actually you are just in the same boat as the rest of us, being told officially what's happening?
Well, we do get lines from trusted sources, yes, which told me yesterday that this was more than just a fire in a vehicle outside this hospital, that we knew something very significant was unfolding, which was why I was on a train up here very early on in this incident as it was unfolding. But as far as the police and the security services are concerned, this is a very worrying time for them. I have to say, Colin, they have been warning about the potential for a real uptick in the terrorist threat facing this country as the country emerges from lockdown, with people clearly indoors, not out and about. We saw the crime rate, for instance, just plummet during that year and a half of those various lockdowns. But then coming out of that, crime has been on the increase again in certain key areas, particularly violent crime. And there's been a real concern that those they call them bedroom jihadis, those who've been radicalised in their own bedrooms, spent a lot of time on the internet during lockdown, have been basically radicalised by individuals, people, members of the terrorist group Islamic State, ISIS, or Al-Qaeda, groups which have been dismantled to a degree over recent years, but are still active, particularly in those extremists who do reach out to the young and the vulnerable over the likes of the internet to persuade them to go off and commit acts like these, and of course also to give them the kind of instruction that they need to assemble these devices.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark White for us there in Liverpool. Well, whenever a bomb goes off, there are those who are quick to blame MI5 or the police, but last month the man in charge of Britain's counter-terrorism effort sought to put things into context. Ken McCallum said more than 30 late-stage terror plots had been foiled in the UK in the past 4 years. Right now, however, the efforts of police and MI5 will be on making sure there are no more imminent attacks. Let's talk this through in the company of Graham Whetton, former police officer of 30 years standing, now a policing analyst. Graham, thanks ever so much for joining us tonight. Do appreciate it. We've talked over the years, oftentimes in the wake of events like this. What is the process right now? Who's involved and who's in charge?
Counter-terror branch will be leading the investigations, we saw from the press briefing, so they would take primacy with this, but they work very, very closely with the local police force who covers the area themselves. Also closely links with the security services as well. So a sharing of information and intelligence, loads of background checks on the now named individual, his links, his associates, internet history, mobile phone history, all those sort of things. Background checks, just trying to work out a motive. And as Mark alluded to in his report, are there more devices? Are there more links? This is just one individual who's acting on his own. They're the key questions that need to be answered.
Key questions that need to be answered. I wonder how many questions are put by politicians into this process. I mean, it feels like we always get Cobra meeting, and there's a great sense of political urgency that the politicians, even the Prime Minister, are sort of taking charge of the investigation. I just wonder to what extent Cobra feeds into this process at all.
it clearly has a role in it because it's the government, they lead the country, but they take, my experience anyway, they take a lot of their lead and information from the security services. The Prime Minister mentioned JTAC, Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre. That's separate from government itself. They advise government. They would advise them that the threat level needs to be raised, which is they'd always err on the side of caution. So again, until we actually know what's happening, and it's facts that have to be established, as opposed to speculation and conjecture that we're seeing in the last couple of days since yesterday. So they'll be working on facts, trying to establish the facts here, advising the government, and COBRA then advise the country.
Graham, do they grow embittered when they are criticised, whether it's the police, counter-terrorism, whether it's MI5, embittered by the fact that they often seem to be on the hook for it? Why didn't they guess this was happening? Why couldn't they predict it? Why couldn't they have followed the suspect? Were they on MI5's radar? We hear these questions time and time again. Sometimes it feels like we're ignoring the perpetrator. And also, I think, maybe, and you know far more about this than many, the sheer labour intensiveness and actual cost of tailing somebody round the clock 7 days a week.
It's hugely resource intensive, very labour intensive as well. So again, you're right to mention that. It's they don't feel embittered. It's part of the job, part of the role they have to do. They do it to protect the public. They work extremely long hours, very, very diligently. You cannot keep tabs on every single person that comes to notice. It comes down to almost like trying to identify those pieces of information, that thread of intelligence that leads you towards something more significant in the intelligence, in the information package about someone specific. And it comes down to getting that information and intelligence, which come through quite often community links, having the police back out in the community, building those relationships and establish the rapport with people and actually speaking to them and getting the information sent to the police and security services.
Graham, other than giving the Prime Minister something to announce, what does raising the threat level to severe actually mean practically?
It will enhance the police response, so more, and you'll hear him saying reassurance patrols, more visible police presence, and also I think it actually raises the public's awareness. People become a bit more vigilant. We have a tendency to almost like slip back into old ways if it isn't like a reminder. So by raising the threat level and the media covering it, it's now gone up to severe. An attack in that category, highly likely. I think people become a lot more aware and vigilant of their surroundings. I come home on a train tonight and there was almost a notable sense of people being a bit more aware and looking around the train carriage in central London. So I think it just raises people's awareness. I think they're more conscious then to report suspicious packages and things to the police, and we're seeing enhanced police presence, a more visible police presence.
We don't know, do we, obviously at this stage, whether this might be a one-off incident or whether it's the beginning of a terror campaign leading all the way up to Christmas. We do know, however, don't we, that, sad to say, sometimes these lone wolves, individual operators, don't need to be a part of a network. The mere example of what they do can perhaps provoke or prompt somebody who's borderline radicalised on the point of thinking about carrying through a plan they've been hatching in their mind, or perhaps on the internet. That's the danger, that we see all this coverage and it inspires, it's a dreadful word to use, but inspires somebody else to do something similar.
But that comes down to the government strategy. The contest strategy has got four strands to it. It's about basically, and one of those is preventing. So identify people, stopping people either becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. So it's about pursuing those that are looking to carry out acts of terrorism, preventing people from being a terrorist, preventing people being radicalised, identifying those vulnerable people. And again, it was mentioned in Mark's report, people sitting at home who become almost like bedroom jihadists. We've had lockdown, people sitting in without being able to get out, have people become radicalised in that period of time. Do the security services now know about these individuals? So it's all part of an overall strategy. But again, it's pulling those pieces of information, that key intelligence together, identifying the people that are a risk to society, and then acting on those ones.
Graham Wootton. Graham, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Well, it's not clear where the man who died in a taxi yesterday hailed from, but the head of MI5 has recently warned that the fall of Afghanistan is likely to have emboldened would-be terrorists here. Others are concerned that the influx of undocumented migrants is a huge security risk too. Some 24,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to reach Britain so far this year. That's 3 times more than last year. And on the Polish border, many thousands of mainly Middle Eastern men have gathered, trying to force their way, it seems, into Western Europe. Let's turn to Nick Oldworth, who's the UK's former counter-terrorism national coordinator, joins me now. Nick Oldworth, we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. If you were still involved in counter-terrorism, what would be your focus now? I mean, it's a massive sort of triaging exercise, isn't it, where you have to decide where to prioritise your resources?
Well, it always has been, and you'll know, I'm sure, Colin, that we talk about a residual pool of people who've come to the notice of the security services and the police in the quantum of around 20 to 30,000, and it's not infrequent, as you and your last contributor alluded to, that individuals from that pot come and commit attacks. And then you then have that sort of soul searching that I think you referenced about, how did we not spot that happening? And that's a huge pool of people. I do just need to come back to you, though, on something you said there around, the risks posed by migrants. It remains a fact that 75% of those people that are committing attacks in the UK are born and bred in the UK. And so we have our own homegrown diaspora of terrorism that we need to try and approach and deal with, both through investigations and, as your previous contributor mentioned, through activities such as the prevent strategy.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, you're absolutely right to point that out. I mean, I think in recent weeks we've simply been drawing attention to the fact that certainly on the Polish-Belarusian border, we're talking about a lot of Middle Eastern males who've flown from Iraq, a country which, through recent bitter experience, might have predisposed some individuals, a tiny minority, to have a certain attitudes towards the West which might be unhelpful, or they may be full-blown ISIS operatives. We don't know. I mean, it's not an unreasonable assumption to think that if you were a member of ISIS and you could get to the West relatively easy, that might be an option you take. We say no more than that. I mean, in terms of what happened in Liverpool yesterday, and we have no idea at this stage what the motivation was, whether the individual was mentally ill. That's often a hallmark of what's happening. But there's a sort of nihilism to the idea of if the intended target was a hospital, or even if it was the Remembrance Sunday service at the cathedral. We're back to that horrible calculation of individuals who actually just don't care how many people they kill, as many as possible.
Yeah, look, that's been the nature of terrorism now for 5 to 10 years. And you can track that back to 2014 when the so-called Islamic State called upon its followers that couldn't travel out to Iraq and Syria to pick up effectively any weapon or anything and use it as a weapon against any target in any place. And then we saw that wave of terrorism and low sophistication terrorism building across Europe and come towards the UK. And I've been narrating this situation now for some months, and my sense is that's exactly what we're seeing again with the build-up of attacks in Europe, some activity in the UK slowly building to where we are today. And I think it's absolutely right that the threat level has been raised. I'm sure that's not just in relation to this incident and the murder of Sir David Amess. I'm sure that it relates to that overall picture of increased activity that Ken McCullum spoke of.
And you talked of the 30,000 number. I think that was the number you gave. It's impossible. It's impossible to physically have eyes on that many individuals. I suppose you devolve to using other ways of monitoring people, most obviously through computers and mobile phones and all the rest of it. But you can see how, when the numbers are that big, individuals will always slip through the net.
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, absolutely right. And any one time there's somewhere between 600 and 800 live investigations being run between MI5 and counterterrorism policing, and those are those that we know most about and those that represent the most nascent threat to the UK. And then we have this cohort of about 2,000 subjects of interest who are more active, and we put more energy into monitoring them. And as you quite rightly say, Colin, that's not going to be human resources monitoring them. There'll be technical resources, and there'll be trigger mechanisms that will hopefully flag those people up to more intensive scrutiny should they cross certain thresholds. The greater number, 20 to 30,000, is a real challenge because what that number represents is people who have historically, in some cases, very historically, come to the attention of the security services. They may well have been through a de-radicalisation programme linked or initiated through the prevent strategy. And they may have come out at the end of that with a perfectly normal view of the world. And then in the intervening years, perhaps something has happened that's changed their mind and been a trigger for them to commit some awful act. And so it's really hard to understand in that broader group where your energies and very limited in the big picture of things, resources should actually go.
Oldworth, Nick, appreciate your time. Thanks ever so much. Now, after the break, how does mainstream media cover terror attacks? Do they see themselves as an agency of reassurance or truth tellers, come what may?
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. It's been my unpleasant journalistic duty to report from the scene of a host of terror attacks over the years, from Nice to Nairobi, from Tunisia to Turkey, and although they're all different, they also follow a pattern of sorts, albeit one that has taken time to take shape. And increasingly, I think there is a reluctance to look at the event full in the face, lest it produces questions too awkward to answer. As my colleague Dan Wootton has pointed out, it was bizarre that at a Downing Street press conference yesterday, 5 hours after a taxi blew up outside the Women's Hospital in Liverpool, there was not a single question about it to the Prime Minister. We shouldn't be surprised by that. Last month, after the MP Sir David Amess was killed, there was the surreal spectacle of politicians and pundits trying to blame the fatal attack on the toxic nature of political discourse, as if Sir David had lost his life to a series of unpleasant tweets, not wounds inflicted by a knife. This morning we were at it again. On a radio phone-in, I heard one commentator attribute events on Merseyside to lockdown. Months of being cooped up had left impressionable young minds vulnerable. There is a kind of mass displacement at work here. A terror attack happens and the commentariat's first instinct is to blame MI5 or the police or the failings of Prevent or, this morning, COVID. Terrorism presented as an authorless phenomenon, like a natural disaster. The perpetrator sometimes feels like an afterthought. Well, this has been going on for, I would say, a couple of decades now, and it's getting harder to sustain. After 9/11, it was the done thing to blame British imperialism or Western intervention in the Middle East. This started to wear pretty thin when we looked at the demands of the terrorists. I remember standing outside the Atocha train station in Madrid, 2004, reading out Al-Qaeda's list of demands. The assumption then, the Western assumption that is, was that it would be all about America's invasion of Iraq, which Spain then supported. The actual list of demands started with the Islamic reconquest of Andalusia, in other words, the righting of a 700-year-old wrong. Well, then for a while, the fashionable narrative became one of poverty. The Yorkshiremen who decided to blow themselves up on the Underground on 7/7 were victims of social exclusion, but that didn't last that long either. I remember standing outside the shattered frontage of Glasgow Airport in 2007, where a doctor and an engineer, highly educated, highly paid men, had driven a jeep that was packed with gas canisters. I would have more sympathy with my media colleagues were they not normally so obsessed with blaming individuals when things do go wrong. Some now seem to view their role as therapeutic, part of a healing process, prescribing social cohesion lest the natives get restless. It's safer to focus on teddy bears and floral bouquets than it is to turn over the rights and wrongs of, for instance, violent jihadism live on air. It's safer to film candlelit vigils and books of condolence than it is to wonder if communities are doing enough to identify militants. It's safer to talk about interfaith dialogue and prime ministerial visits than it is to wonder if someone smuggled themselves here as a migrant. 4 years ago, I stood for a week in a square in Manchester as it slowly filled with handwritten tributes and the ubiquitous helium balloons, acts of sweetness, which belied the reality of what had happened to the bodies of 22 people, some of them children, at the hands of a suicide bomber. As I stood there, part of this mass editorial digression, I realised what was happening. It was as if to blame a terrorist had become an act of what we now call victim shaming. You can't possibly blame the man who wore the suicide belt. It's not really his fault. He was brainwashed. He was vulnerable. He was young. He was, in his own way, a victim too. Nobody's to blame, except maybe us, for not having the wit to see the attack coming. That is where we are, it seems to me. What will it take to recapture the intellectual self-confidence to speak plainly again, to discuss what it is jihadist terror, if that's what it was in this instance, without acting as if it's a natural occurrence like extreme weather, and without worrying we'll be called out for hate speech? Well, I'm afraid to say that if an attack on a children's music concert didn't bring that about, there is little chance that an attempted suicide bombing, if that's what this was, against a women's hospital will. That's tonight's Brazier Angle. We'll be talking about that a little later on. But for now, we're going to change tack and talk about the Queen, whose health remains a subject of concern after the Sovereign missed yesterday's Remembrance Sunday service. She reportedly has a strained back. Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales flew to Jordan for the first leg of a tour of the Middle East, a reminder of how increasingly he does the air miles once clocked up by the monarch. Joining me now, the royal expert and commentator, Rafe Hadel-Mancu. Rafe, thanks so much for coming in. Do appreciate it. How is she?
Well, I think we need to put things into perspective. We've heard Piers Morgan and others recently say that this is really a sign that there's something more troubling here, given the fact that she had so much time off also since the last couple of weeks, missed COP26 and so forth. But what we actually do know, the facts are very few because people are entitled to their privacy, is that this really does seem to have been a mobility issue, a straining of the back. The Queen's had a long-standing issue with her hip and with her knee. But if this had been a more serious, or had it been connected to her earlier hospital visit on October the 20th, her first time in hospital for 8 years, then we wouldn't have seen her driving around in her car as we did just last week. She had been to Sandringham for a long weekend and came back. So we need to put things into perspective. The two events, as far as we know, are unrelated.
You say she's entitled to medical confidentiality, as we all are. And of course, up to a point, that's true, isn't it? But she's also the head of state. And in a sense, if you believe in monarchy, as we both do, that actually she exemplifies the state. Her person is the state on one level. And therefore we have a right to know more than we would about private individuals.
No, absolutely we do. But we do know. I mean, we understand the basics of the Queen having a strained back, of the Queen not being able to attend. And as you know, the Royal Household did get into trouble for pretending that the Queen had been at Windsor Castle when in fact she was at a hospital, and the royal flag continued to fly over Windsor Castle even though she wasn't there. So yes, you're quite right. We do have a right to know, but to a certain degree.
Do you think a lot of the great pleasures she derived from life are now falling away a little bit? I mean, the horse riding, for instance, which I think, you know, to get through to your early 90s and still be riding is extraordinary. But we saw, was it the Westminster Abbey a while ago, the centenary of the founding of the Royal British Legion, stick in public for the first time. We are seeing this gentle, and to be expected at 95, physical deterioration, but I wonder how much it's actually reducing the quality of her life.
Well, I think this is the issue. The Queen has been in rude health for so long that we are surprised to see these things happen. But we have to remember, her husband was in and out of hospital many times. Her mother, the Queen Mother, had 2 sticks, had her hip replaced, still managed to live a full life. The Queen was riding a horse only last month at the age of 95, if you can imagine, and she was out walking her dogs regularly. So we'll see whether she carries on. Remember, the Duke of Edinburgh was continuing to be a carriage rider long after many of his illnesses and frailty had knocked the wind out of him on several occasions. So I certainly wouldn't say it's far too early to speculate on any of this. Let's see how things go for the rest of the year. And we have to remember, she is a World War II veteran herself. I mean, she's at 95, 96 in February. The oldest person at the cenotaph yesterday was 98. So she's only 2 years shy, more or less, of one of those veterans. So I think she's done very well.
And there's no sense, is there, that there isn't a ready stream of royals who can fill some of the gaps. We saw that at the Remembrance Sunday service with the Duchess of Cambridge, Camilla as well. And there is the Prince of Wales going to the Middle East, first leg of which takes him to Jordan. But he's 73. I mean, we talk a lot about Joe Biden, who's 5 years older, and his fitness for office, physical fitness for office. I mean, the Prince of Wales is a sprightly 73, but he's still 73.
He's the oldest Prince of Wales in history, and it's just a great shame, that Prince Harry chose to abandon his family, his country and his sovereign just when he's needed most, actually, to come and he's chosen this superficial, vacuous life of virtue signalling rather than serving the country with duty and service and dedication to duty, because the Queen actually needs, the whole plan had been to streamline the monarchy, so it was the Prince of Wales and his 2 sons and their wives who were going to take the monarchy forward in a new way. The monarchy always evolves, and this was going to be the new face of the monarchy going forward, much less of the excess cousins taking part. And Prince Harry, unfortunately, threw a spanner into the works of that. So we saw the Duke of Kent, actually, the Queen's first cousin, and Princess Alexandra, representing the Queen at the cenotaph yesterday on the balcony. They were the ones who were the official representatives, and Camilla and Sophie and Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, were on the next balcony to it. But they're 84, and and the Duke of Kent's father died in the Second World War, so there's a symbolism there for him to be there. But still, I'm sure at 84 they were expecting to have a much more low-key life, but now they've had to step up to the fray as well.
Rafe, there's a tension, isn't there, between, on the one hand, the instincts of the Prince of Wales, which seem to be to offer a slimmed-down monarchy, less fuss, less money, more focus on a few key individuals, and the appetite from those people who want public engagements involving a royal, plant this tree, open this school, cut this ribbon, whatever it is, hand over this award, which requires people to physically do it.
Absolutely. And this actually puts a light to the old argument that we could adapt into a bicycling monarchy as they have in Belgium and the Netherlands and Denmark and elsewhere, because, of course, we're a much bigger country than those tiny countries are, much bigger population, and there are many more functions that need to be served, and the public need to understand you need a larger royal family to fulfil all of those duties.
Rafe Heidel-Manku, appreciate you coming in today. Thanks ever so much. After the break, did the Russians blast one of their old Soviet satellites with a new weapon, and did the debris endanger the International Space Station?
Coming up Tuesday on Dan Wootton Tonight, Strictly Come Dancing head judge Shirley Ballas joins me live to put to rest behind-the-scenes rumours about the hit BBC show. I'll break down the day's top stories and give you a first look at the newspaper front pages with my superstar panel, the journalist and author Rebecca Reed, conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, and the former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson. Olympic hero and record-breaking sprinter Ewan Thomas has an inside look at what's kicking off in the world of sport, including whether David Beckham is a human rights hypocrite. Political commentator Darren Grimes delivers his uncompromising take in The Outsider. Plus, I'll crown a greatest Britain and Union jackass, and you'll get to voice your opinion on one of the day's biggest talking points in The Clash. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, 9 p.m, Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Drama in orbit today after astronauts aboard the International Space Station took to their lifeboats of sorts to avoid debris that may have been created by a Russian anti-satellite weapon. That's quite an opening paragraph. What's the truth of the matter, however? With me, the author and space expert, Dr. David Whitehouse. David, thanks ever so much for joining us. This is the ISS going into, quote, near-miss mode every 93 minutes.
That's right. It was a result of the anti-satellite test carried out by the Russians at 3 o'clock this morning. What's called a Nudal DA ASAT missile was launched from the Plesetsk launch base in Siberia towards Cosmos 1408, which is an old Soviet electronic spy satellite, which was launched 30 years ago. It hasn't been working for 15 years, so it was a very large 2 tons target for their new system, which has been tried 10 times before, but never until now has it actually been intended to strike and destroy a satellite. The American US Department of State has condemned this, and there is a cloud of debris in orbit.
Yeah. Was blowing it up in space illegal?
No, it's not illegal. There are various treaties against space weapons, and it depends upon what you decide is a space weapon. I mean, China carried out a similar series of tests in 2007. America did one in 2008, and even India a couple of years ago carried out a similar type of test. So if these anti-satellite weapons are designed against ballistic missiles, then it is against the ABM treaty. However, against your own satellite, it is a moot point. The United States Department of Defense has said this evening that it shows that Russia is not serious about not having weapons in space, because it augurs badly. And it's part of the sign of the times that both China, India, and the United States, to a certain degree, are looking at disabling their opponent's space assets in times of conflict.
The ISS, we're just going to show some pictures of the International Space Station for those people who need to be reminded of what it looks like. It can actually, I read, manoeuvre. That's not the ISS, is it? But the ISS can. Oh, there's some of the. Is it the Soyuz and the new SpaceX thing, Dragon, docking? But it can manoeuvre.
That is a modular docking, yes.
Yeah, but the ISS can actually sort of maybe get out of the way is putting it too grandly, but it can manoeuvre, David.
Yes, it does occasionally, quite literally, get out of the way. It can adjust its orbit slightly. It has an area around it of 25 miles, and if any debris that can be trackable, and you can track things the size of, I don't know, the size of a chair in space, if any of that is detected to come within that region, then they either try and get the space station out of the way, or the protocol is to go to the entrances to the return ships and wait. And following the explosion of Cosmos 1408 this morning, that debris is going to pass the International Space Station every 93 minutes for the next day or so. And they've changed the protocol at this moment that for the next day or so, internal hatches will have to stay closed in case there is an impact and a depressurization. It will then give them more time to get out as that damage is isolated. So it's the first time for the next day on the International Space Station. The US Space Department is furious that the Russians have carried out this test, and space operators around the world are also furious that thousands of pieces of debris are now threatening useful, productive satellites in low Earth orbit.
There was a Hollywood film, wasn't there? Wasn't there George Clooney? Gravity. That is the echoes of that. And the 7 astronauts actually got in the lifeboats. They got in the 2 separate craft when this first happened. As you say, they've now changed the protocol and they're in back in the ISS, but closing the hatches internally. But they actually, get in the lifeboats, guys. It could be that bad.
Yes, they do. The protocol is when there is a serious threat, they have to carry out emergency safing of the space station, and then they go to the entrances of the Dragon capsule and the Soyuz capsule, so that if given the order, they just have to close the door behind them. And it literally then is press the button quickly. And it only takes one button on these craft. It's all automated to blow them away from the space station and return them to the Earth. It's that serious. They were prepared to leave the space station untended, literally at 5 minutes' notice. It was that serious. I don't think that people in the non-space community have actually, apart from yourself, obviously, have actually got the message that this is an extremely serious event that's causing international tension between particularly America and Russia.
I mean, you are giving us a pretty clear sense, David, that this is, in the scheme of things, this is more than a minor glitch. It's a major incident and something which may have consequences further down the track. There's just a sense, isn't there, that it's if not quite the Wild West up there, it's getting a bit more contested.
It's basically, you can do what you can do, in the sense, if you can do it, who's going to stop you? The Soviet Union, Russia, I beg your pardon, has been developing this Noodle anti-satellite test system. Everybody's known about it, but they haven't performed this test in anger yet. The Chinese have got various bits of technology in development, and no doubt they could do exactly the same thing. This is part of, I think, principally the relationship between China and the United States, in the sense that China wants to become the world's leading spacefaring nation by the 2049 anniversary of the revolution. And they show every sign of being able to do that. And in order to do that, they have to control military space. That annoys the Americans, and that frightens the Russians, who are stepping their foot on their accelerator to develop their military capabilities in space. This is a very worrying military space race we are seeing.
White House, David, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Quite often, the stuff we tell you about trans rights can feel irrelevant, really, to your very actual life. But here's a story that brings home, perhaps, what happens when trans ideology meets real life. Nicola Sturgeon's SNP government is making sure that tampons and sanitary towels are available in men's loos to cater for former women who now identify as men. Here's Andrew Doyle to reflect on this one. I mean, it's not a great investment. It's not going to cost a lot of money, but it will strike some people as, given the number of people who will be served by this gesture, a gesture?
Of course. I mean, it's going to affect very, very few people. And you might say, well, it's why even worry about it? It's something you can reasonably ignore. It's not a problem. Really, what this is about is a statement of intent. It's a statement of belief. The SNP is really hammering home the fact that they think that these sex-segregated spaces shouldn't be segregated according to biological sex, but rather gender identity. That's the point of doing this gesture. And this fits into what the SNP have been doing all along. You might recall last month, they changed their wording for the maternity leave policy so they wouldn't use the word mother, even though we're talking about maternity leave here. And that came about because of pressure from Stonewall. And there was actually some documents were released under the Freedom of Information Act, and it turned out that the SNP had made the change specifically because they wanted to score more points in Stonewall's Workplace Equality Index. So effectively what you've got is the Scottish government acting on behalf of a lobbying group and being rewarded by the lobbying group for those changes, for those policy changes. That's actually quite serious. That's why a lot of people are very concerned about Stonewall's influence, even in the British government as well as the Scottish government. I mean, there was an article by Joe Bartosh the other day about the fact that even within the Tory cabinet, Stonewall has an incredible degree of influence at the moment, and it is concerning. It's not really about tampons in toilets. It's about the bigger picture and what this says about the government at the moment.
And just my introduction there, talking about sometimes we move from the abstract to the real. Yeah. My first email today, Andrew, got my first email. Other than the name, it said chosen pronouns, preferred pronouns. It was from a financial services company. Yeah. And I just wonder, I mean, it was just somebody signing off a bit of financial stuff, but I was quite tempted to write back and say something.
Yeah, and people should. More and more they should, because it seems innocuous. It's a couple of words at the end of an email. You can ignore it, that's fine. But it's the equivalent of a declaration in a belief in a certain religious faith coming at the end of an email. It's nothing to do with the other person. This is by writing your pronouns in your email, you are saying, I subscribe to gender identity ideology. It's something that very few people subscribe to. There's a minority of people who do, but I do.
I think that individual probably just,
Probably doesn't, actually. This is the point. And probably doesn't think through the ramifications of what it means when you do that. And it's interesting because the Scottish Civil Service, they've been encouraging, the SNP has been encouraging the Scottish Civil Service to sign off emails in that way and to declare pronouns at the start of meetings. And 60% of the Civil Service have said they won't do that. You see, at the moment, it's being suggested. People are being encouraged to do so. I wonder how long it'll be before it is compulsory. And when it becomes compulsory, then we're into the realms of compelled speech, which is a serious threat to the principle of free speech. And that is what's coming next. I mean, let's make no mistake about that. So we do have to be watchful of this stuff. It seems silly. It's like a couple of words here, a couple of words there. Why would you get all
it's pernicious. It's too pernicious.
It's because it's about something much bigger than that. It's about ideological capture.
I'm going to come to this story, which I was hesitant about at one point because the word I want to use I can't use on live telly, but it struck me as nonsense.
Not true.
Not true, that's it. And it's for an Alexa-type device. Always be suspicious of the hyphen type.
Yeah.
Alexa-type device called Themis.
Yes.
And what does it do, Andrew?
Well, Themis, goddess of justice, right? Divine justice. So this should make you nervous already. This is a listening device. Now, I'm with you. I thought this might be a hoax, and I'm
still not sure.
No, I'm not. Well, it's been reported in the Telegraph and the Mail. There are photographs of the device. So
have we not got the photos?
It looks pretty real.
We haven't got the photo.
What it is for people at home is it's a device that you put in your house. It was originally designed. This has been unveiled this week in Dubai Design Week. And it's designed for it to monitor the conversation that goes on at the dinner table. And if someone swears or says something that's politically incorrect or uses a microaggression, it will sound an alarm and that invites those in attendance to consider and discuss where they went wrong in their conversation. This is very scary stuff.
It's a game. Oh, come on, that just feels frivolous.
Now, the inventor at Dubai Design Week has said that there's been so much interest from schools as well and from companies that actually it might be rolled out in those terms. And just to give you an insight into this, a lot of people talk about Orwell, they talk about Huxley and Brave New World, they talk about these dystopian futures. Have you seen the film Demolition Man?
Yeah,
1993. It's Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes. Yeah. And there is a device, this is a future, Los Angeles in the future, where there are devices everywhere that sound an alarm if you swear, and you get a little fine comes out. And it's actually a really funny aspect of the film. But now it's happening. Now it's real, if it's real. So I'm just going to put that caveat then, because I'm not 100% sure. But I think I think it could well be. This is the logical next step, isn't it? That you will have devices monitoring what you're saying, because there are already reading apps, for instance, where you can read a book and it will take out the words that are potentially offensive for you so that you won't have to...
But this is coming out. I wonder whether actually, I mean, I'm not sort of buying this really overall, but I wonder whether actually, if it were to take off, heaven forfend, it might be people effectively training to learn to strip away some annoying linguistic habits they have, to learn not to fall foul, because, you know, back to our pronoun,
yes.
The person who agreed to send that email probably didn't add their preferred pronouns to the bottom, but knew that if they kicked off about it, the boss might not, HR might not like it very much.
Right.
So equally, I can imagine a situation where people might want to, you know, learn how to be more politically correct. Without actually putting it to the test of actual human beings.
Well, I mean, the quotes from the designer make it clear that this was the intention and that the interest has come from schools and companies. And so I'm not sure. The fact that they've called it Themis, they've named it after the goddess of justice. I mean, it's the stuff of totalitarian fiction, isn't it? It is. Well, I hope you're right. I hope we've both been tricked.
It's the stuff of fiction.
Well, most certainly, but it looks like it is potentially happening. It wouldn't surprise me anymore.
Ooh, grumpy old middle-aged man. I like that. Andrew, thanks ever so much. Andrew Doyle. We've got some problems with our graphics this evening, so we can't show you the poll. The poll question was about events in Liverpool and to what extent there may be a nascent Christmas terror campaign. Not particularly jolly subject matter, but an important one, I'm sure you'll agree. I can at least read you out some of the responses on Twitter to that. Andrew tweeted, statistically, what are the chances? There are so many things that could happen to us, even in our own homes or gardens. Life has to carry on. This is about whether people ought to be changing their plans apropos a potential terror campaign. Mary tweeted, Christmas markets will soon be in towns. I wonder if there will be bollards this year again to stop vehicles. That's a sad thought, isn't it? Mark tweeted, absolutely not. Can try as much as they want, but they will never stop us being us. Keep those thoughts, keep those votes coming in. We'll try and reflect it tomorrow. Dan Wootton is next.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things turning quite windy overnight across northern Britain, and that'll stay that way through Tuesday as well. There'll be a bit of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but most of England and Wales will be dry thanks to this area of high pressure. It's further north, though, where this low and this set of weather fronts is approaching. Ahead of all of that, we've got a dying weather front that's still been making for quite a dank and drizzly day over parts of northern England and Wales, and still some rain and drizzle here through the evening, but it continues to fizzle out. Further south, we could see some fog patches where we have some clearer skies, and that could take a while to clear on Tuesday. Meanwhile, that weather system really pepping the winds up across the far northwest. Quite mild here, but elsewhere a bit of a chilly start to Tuesday. Mostly grey starts, some places seeing a bit of sunshine. A bit of fog in the south will take a while to clear away. Could stick around certainly through the morning rush hour. It's going to turn wet across western Scotland and for a time through Northern Ireland. Spell of rain here through the middle of the day. That'll be followed by some lively showers too across the far northwest. But for most of England and Wales, it'll stay dry. Yes, lots of cloud, but where we see some brightness, it's going to be pretty mild, 12, 13 degrees. Through Tuesday evening, that rain will trickle into parts of northern England and Wales for a time, but again, it kind of fizzles out. Lots of showers will come into Northern Ireland and western Scotland, some snow on the tops of the mountains across Scotland. Staying windy here as well. That will again be a feature of the weather on Wednesday. Quite a blustery day with showers for northern and western Scotland. The odd one for Northern Ireland, northwest England, but again, many southern and eastern areas dry on Wednesday, probably a bit brighter as well, particularly in the south. Better chance of seeing some sunshine, but a little bit cooler with temperatures back closer to average, but still double digits for most. There will be a fairly brisk breeze blowing, though, on Wednesday. It turns milder again through the rest of the week with a lot of cloud, some rain at times in the northwest, but a lot of dry weather as well. Goodbye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon